Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 2021 ASU Data Conference. It's coordinated by the ASU University Technology Office. My name is Lisa King, and I am your Zoom host. I am a business analyst in the University Technology Office in the Data and Analytics Core. Remember to stay connected and continue the conversation in our Slack channel, hashtag ASU-Data Community. And with that, I've started the recording, and let me welcome our presenter, Phil Arcuria, and he is presenting on Actionable Analytics Gumbo. So let me stop share so he can talk to you. There you go, Phil. It's all yours now.
Great, thank you. I appreciate it. Let me just get my slides up here. All right, well, first off, thanks everyone for taking the time to join me this morning. I'm excited to share with you a little bit about what we're doing here at Actionable Analytics. And I called it Gumbo because it's a little mixture of this, a little mixture of that maybe may not seem like it all goes together, but in the end, hopefully it all synergistically makes something tasty. At least that's what we're trying for. So Mike caught my reference a minute ago. So if you used to watch Louisiana Cooking on PBS, you had Chef Justin. His two catchphrases were "How y'all are" and "Guaranteed." So he was a hoot to watch. He was a character. So kind of the menu for today is here's the 4 products that we're primarily focusing on within Actionable Analytics. That I'll walk you through, as well as a high-level overview of what Actionable Analytics is. So it'll go through, pretty quick. So I'll just do a high-level overview. Of course, if you have any questions, just jump in or reach out to me afterwards. So first off, what's Actionable Analytics? So if you haven't had a chance to attend any presentations where we've given an overview, let me just kind of walk through real quick what our mission is. So we fall within the Office of the Provost, and I report to Jennifer Wilkin there. But although we fall on that side of the house, we're really focused on enterprise level applications and solutions. So what do I mean by this? What I mean is we're not just trying to solve those things that are of most interest to the Provost Office. We're really looking across the institution as a whole and saying, where are some of these pain points that we can address from our specific perspective? And that's perspective is how best do we take the data we have or help collect additional data and transform that into actionable insights. And I know we're one of many groups that are doing this, but one thing that is specific to Actionable Analytics is everything we do is really focused on student success. So we don't do anything with budget data or HR data. It's all related to student data in some form or fashion. And then in terms of within that context, we're really focused on all ASU degree seeking students. So in terms of what's in scope, it's both campus immersion and digital immersion. What's out of scope is those groups of students that are not degree seeking. So think of ASU Prep as an example. Some of the things that we're doing may help other initiatives, but it's just not the explicit focus of Actionable Analytics. So that's who we are at a high level. Now let me kind of walk through each of our main products. The first is what we call the Actionable Analytics Data Mart. So it really has two primary purposes. So as all of you I'm sure are aware, is we're really fortunate here at ASU that we have really rich systems, but a lot of the data was collected for operational reporting purposes. It really wasn't collected and enriched to support broader analytic initiatives. And so the first purpose of this data mart is just create a centralized repository that's really curated to meet the needs of our other applications. So that's kind of the number one goal. But only shortly after that is helping provide that same type of data to other stakeholders across the institution, because we know not just Actionable Analytics, but there's a lot of other groups that have that same need, in that we want to do something analytically with our data, but as the data are currently housed or enriched, it just doesn't quite match which requires a lot of local effort to extract the data, clean the data, reformat it, enrich it, etc. So what does that look like? Well, first is just if we look at the data integration versus data enrichment. This is just a high level overview. And Mike, I'm sure I'm butchering the nuances here, but in terms of on the data integration side, it's really getting data into our ecosystem and ingesting it. So that may be getting it from a vendor and putting it in the data lake, or may ultimately end up in the warehouse. We don't do any of that on Actionable Analytics. It's primarily done within UTO, and we're great beneficiaries and appreciative of that work, but nothing under the banner of Actionable Analytics really is focused on data ingest. Where we're really working on is the data enrichment side. So it's taking that data once it's been brought into the ecosystem, and how can we best enrich it and structure it to really meet those two goals I said before. What do we need for our applications and Actionable Analytics, and then what does the broader ASU community need? And then once it's enriched, putting it in places that folks can get, whether that's the warehouse or AUDB, or we're also working closely with Mike and Jason on spinning up our own Redshift cluster. So in terms of development, we really put it into 3 buckets, and these are just our own terms and way of structuring it. So nothing formal here, just helps with our own internal conversations. The first one is what we call proactive, and that's really any data asset. And think of it, a data asset as a table or a view or anything that's capturing the data. It can even be some flat files in some cases. But it's basically in the proactive space. Is let's go out and capture data that we're currently not persisting. A good example of this is with the service indicator data. So as an example, a student may have a past due balance and they get a service indicator hold because they can't enroll because that past due balance is over a certain threshold. So let's say that as of today, the student has that service indicator hold on their account, and then tomorrow they pay off the balance, so that service indicator hold is lifted. Well, as it is now, that data is really not persisted in a way that makes it very easy to use. So if you wanted to say, build a predictive model, and in order to train that model, you need several years of historical data. Well, you'd want to know exactly which day that student had a hold and which day they didn't have a hold. Well, currently you really can't do that, or you'd have to go through really messy log files. So the proactive data is basically getting that data, putting it in kind of that first stage of cleaning and aggregation just to capture it so we're not losing it. And then the next stage of development is what we call our core development. And it's taking that proactive data and other source data and putting it into useful grain sizes. So for example, if we continue that same scenario I was just talking about, let's say now we want to know, as of a given term, did a student have a service indicator hold because they had a past due balance above a certain threshold? Well, we'll have a core table built, which is a student term table. So it has data about a student aggregated at the term level, and we can have a flag in there that's just a 1, 0, or yes, no, that indicates whether or not they had that hold at any point during that term. So that's the second level, and kind of progressively aggregating and enriching. And the last one is what we called reactive. And it's basically any type of object that we need that's very specific to actionable analytics needs. So if it's really nuanced and idiosyncratic for one of our applications. The first two are ones that as we build, virtually everything is going into the warehouse, and we're sharing it out with the ASU community because we want as many people to benefit from that as possible. The third category, we're happy to share if there's any other uses, but most likely it'll just be kind of for our own internal use cases. So here's some examples of what we've built to date, or it's very close to being completed in each of those 3 areas. I won't go over them. When you get this deck, it'll have kind of links to each of these. For each one, we create a summary sheet, which I'll show you in just a second. And then this little icon just means that it's a slowly changing table. So it's a type 2 dimension. This is the primary ETL design that we've been using. It basically just means every time something changes, it gets captured. So another approach is you could snapshot data, which goes out every day, let's say, or whenever it's updated, and takes a new snapshot of the data, which is great for comprehensiveness. But if things aren't changing, you're storing a whole lot of data you don't need to. But with the slowly changing table, it's just going out and capturing when something changes. So for example, we would know the exact day when that student's hold went from being on to going from it being off. So real quick, just to give you a thing is, we're trying to do our best in terms of documentation, but whenever we create a new object, we'll put together a summary sheet. This is in a Google Drive that everyone at ASU has access, just gives a description of it, the grain size, some information about it. If you're like me and sometimes you get into a table and you're like, boy, I really wish I knew who built this because I could ask some questions. We have some information here. So this is for our LMS activity table. So you can see who built it and then who's a subject matter expert, and then some contact information, and then just some example queries just to get folks started. May or may not fit your use case, but at least it's better than having folks start from a blank slate, which is always challenging. And until we get everything in Calibra, we have a link here to our kind of a quasi data dictionary. All right, and I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but actionable analytics, the thing that I'm most proud of and what I enjoy working on so much is that this is a collaborative effort. So it really was born at the highest levels, both on the provost side and UTO side, of looking at how do we address this need of taking the data we have and putting it in a form that can inform analytic efforts focused on student success. And it's been a great collaborative effort across those two groups and otherwise and others. In particular, a lot of credit to Jennifer Wilkin and Mike Sharkey, but there's a whole host of others, and it's been great. It is not, the provost office project and UTO are servicers of that, or vice versa. We're joint partners, and Actionable Analytics is a joint endeavor. And so here's some of the folks that work on it from the Data Mart side. So Campaign Builder, let me go on, give you a quick overview of this. So this is a true application, if you will, that we're working with UTO to build, and it's really focused on three things. How do we best segment students for targeted outreach? So in other words, how do we create lists of students based on very specific criteria? How do we integrate those lists into some other system that can help us with the outreach? So for example, how do we create the list, and then how do we get it into Salesforce so we can create portal cases that then frontline staff like advisors or coaches can outreach? And the last is collecting data about those students and interactions. For many purposes, one of those though is to conduct evaluations of efficacy. So let's say we want to know everyone that's in the College of Health Solutions that is enrolled in a very specific course that is a certain number of credits away from graduation. Step one functionality allows you to do that. And then let's say you wanted to then integrate that into the mobile app, so you could send them some sort of push notification, perhaps alerting them to the follow-up course in the sequence. And then 3 would collect information about what was sent by whom, et cetera. And then hopefully down the line, it'll collect information about the outcome. So if you're prodding that kind of functionality in step 2, there is trying to elicit some sort of action, it would capture data about whether or not that action or behavior was taken. So let's look at just some quick mock-ups with the disclaimer. Like with all mock-ups, they can change daily, but here's to give you an idea of what the early versions will look like. So it'll all be a web-based app, front-end built in React. You would log in and you would see a homepage here that would list all the campaigns that you've created, when you created it, and then some links to the details, etc. Let's say though you wanted to create a new campaign, you'd click on that Create New Campaign button. Then you would go in here and it would ask you for some information about the campaign. The name, a short description. If you want to upload some additional data that you want included in the campaign. So this is really important because in the early stages of Campaign Builder, it'll have a number of data elements, but it won't be comprehensive to meet everyone's use case. So let's say you're in an academic unit and you administer your own survey to students. Well, we're not going to have access to that within the campaign builder, but you could upload a file that has student IDs and the responses to those questions that are pertinent to whatever your outreach is. And then that will append it to all the other information that you're going to grab within Campaign Builder. And then you'll go and you'll just fill out some other information that we'll use both for reporting purposes, but also to inform kind of channeling of functionality. And then you could indicate whether or not you'd like to make your campaign open to others. We've actually changed that to make campaign shared and make logic shared. Same with the logic used to create it. So you may not be comfortable with the ASU community seeing the actual list of students, but you may say, I'm comfortable with them seeing the pseudo SQL logic that was used to create it. Then what you would go in is you would have this ability to create the filters needed to segment your students. So we're still working on this functionality, but the idea is give the non-technical user the ability to make very finely filtered student groups without knowing any SQL whatsoever. And that this you could walk through on the front end, on the back end, it would generate the SQL to actually pull those students. So you'd go through, for example, and you'd say, I want the primary latest academic career equal to undergraduate or law. And then you might say, I want their academic plan not equal to whatever. And then you could click apply filters and it would show you campaign preview. This is all made up data, by the way, so no FERPA concerns. But it'll give you an idea just to check it, first 50, 100 rows or so, see if it makes sense. If not, you can go back and tweak your filters and do that an infinite number of times. Then when you're done, you could export the list as a CSV if you want, or you could publish the campaign, which kind of saves it within the Campaign Builder system, and it will allow you to take it to the next step in terms of integrating it into an application for outreach. And it'd also capture that campaign logic I mentioned, so you could come back at any time and say, oh, what did I use to build that list? And it would show you, or if you wanted to share that with someone else. So very much in the early stages of this, we just released one version of it, and it's very much for internal purposes, getting some of that core infrastructure in place. Release 2 scheduled for early January. That's when it'll start to look like a rougher version of what I just showed you. Release 3 is when it'll start to take form similar to the mock-ups, and when we'll actually get users in there, and that'll probably be March-ish when that happens, and then we'll continue to expand from there. But here's the team working on it. Great folks working really hard. I'm really appreciative of all their efforts. All right, so let's go on to the third kind of product suite, if you will, for Actionable Analytics, and that's our predictive models. So, kind of really the overall purpose is just how do we take all the data that we have? How do we take, both traditional analytic techniques, machine learning, et cetera, and use that to help inform decision-making? And so the first place that we started here is we said, before we really get going, we need to come up with some ethical and professional guidelines for how we're using predictive analytics, which really matched well with the keynote this morning. And not to say that we have this 100% articulated, to the nth degree, but we really tried to be thoughtful before we built any models to say, what are the standards and the codes that we need to hold ourselves to? And first and foremost, it was just do no harm. And then the second one is, we want to do good. And so those two drive it. There's a number of other ones like data privacy, making sure that only folks that need the models get the models, et cetera. I won't go over the whole list, but just want to let you know that going into this, we know that there can be some very negative unintended consequences of using predictive analytics, particularly at the student level. And we're mindful of that and trying to mitigate that the best that we can, knowing that that's always a work in progress. So where did we start? So the first thing that we started on was predicting next term persistence for undergraduate students, both campus immersion and online. And what we did is we actually have a number of what we call model segments, which is we broke up students into subgroups of similar students. And this is just to aid in what predictors that we used for each of these groups, because some predictors apply to some groups, but not to others. There's other ways of doing it. So this isn't the only way, but this one that made the most sense for us. So if we see in the campus immersion side, we have 7 segments of students. Digital immersion or online, we have 1 less, and that's just because they have less continuing international students. So we just group them together. And what we do is we create a different model for each week of the term. So if you multiply the 15 weeks by all these models, we have about 200 models total that we create for each term. So here's how it works: is go ahead and we pull the data, we enrich the data. That flows through our models in AWS. We use a lot of potential predictors, about 50 or so. I won't go through them all, but I put them in here so you guys could look through it afterwards. The little chili peppers are just the ones that we added for this term. And that's really just to reinforce is that we're constantly evaluating and saying, where can we look for new predictors? At some point, we'll hit an asymptote and we'll plateau out, but particularly looking at like Jonathan Carroll's, if you saw his presentation right before this with the Google Tag Manager, which was really interesting, there's still a lot of area for us to explore for predictors. And again, we only use the predictors that are most relevant, most predictive for the given student segment. So it goes through the models and it calculates the probability of each student persisting to the next term. Then we go through several variations of kind of the back end of just grouping that into quantiles, which is, think of it as just deciles. And then what you may have seen is what we call the persistence outlook, where it puts each student in one of 5 categories based off their relative likelihood to persist. And relative is based to students in their modality. So we do this for all campus immersion students, and then we do it for all digital immersion or online students. Then we also collect a lot of information about which features, so features just another name for predictors, which features are contributing most to a given student's daily predictions. One point where this place where this information is populated is in the Salesforce student profile. I think we have some sessions on that in the data conference. If you're unfamiliar with the student profile, it's a wealth of information within Salesforce. It's a modification that we built, we ASU, not Actionable Analytics. And if you go under the undergraduate indicators tab, you could see in there the daily persistence outlook for the student and how that changes. Over time, we want to be able to supplement this that tells the story of why did the student go up or down on a given day. So what were the predictors contributing to that? Right now, as of today, this is only populating for campus immersion students, but imminently, I'm hoping in the next week or 2, we will have this populated for online students. Just with the Oracle switchovers taking a little longer, but the idea is that for virtually all undergraduate students, this would get populated every day. So I won't go over all this, but just suffice to say, it's all automated. One of the things that the team's done a great job. And Kiova, when he was here, if you had a chance to work with him, Kiova Jackson, he was instrumental in this. And now Hamid on our team is really productionizing it. So now it's fully automated. It generates predictions every day of the year. Knock on wood, there's only been one day when it didn't get predictions because something failed, because we have some redundant systems now in place, but it's all working really well in terms of productionizing. And then the key focus is really the so what, right? I mean, I like modeling. It's my background. I think it's cool, but if we can't have some utility from it, then it's not worth the resources we're investing. And so here's just a high level overview of how we're putting this into action. I won't go over it due to time, but really it's working with folks both at a centralized level and within various academic units to say, how can you use this information to inform your efforts, particularly for outreaching students that you may think either You want to look for students who are maybe more at risk and you want to offer them some sort of additional services or outreach, or maybe you have to reach out to students and there's just more than you can reasonably handle. So you have to triage your outreach and you can use this information for that. Those are just two of many use cases. And one of the big areas too that we're focusing on is continuing to think, what sort of data can we provide and training to power users? And how can we continue to translate these predictions into actionable information, which is ongoing discussion, and would love to get information from any of you. If you have any thoughts on that, please send me a note. And here's the group that's working diligently on that. So the last area is dashboards. This is really to supplement the other three areas. So we're not taking over dashboards don't send me any emails about, can you create a dashboard? We still have folks that are doing that. So at the enterprise level with, what UTO is doing, or on EPLOS side, they do a lot of dashboards. That's all going to continue as is. These are custom tailored dashboards to support those three other areas I just mentioned. I won't spend much time on them, but just to give you a kind of a teaser, we have a model evaluation dashboard. This is really just for internal uses, but we constantly track the quality of our predictive models to see how they're doing. Then we have a predictive persistence dashboard. So if you wanted to see those daily predictions at various group levels, you can, or you could filter it by subgroup. That's still, though, at a group level. Then on the lower right, one of the things that we're beta testing is a student level persistence dashboard. So if you wanted to see for a specific student on a given day, what is their predicted probability of persisting, and which features or predictors most contributed to that? Or if you're just saying, I want to see how each of those, probably for each student, there are probably closer to 3 dozen predictors are contributing to their prediction, you'd be able to see that. We're being very slow and cautious with this, though, because we want to be very mindful of only providing what's actionable, being protective of student privacy, et cetera. So it'll probably be spring at the earliest before we start testing this with some end users. But the idea is, how do we get that information to frontline staff to help inform their outreach with students?
Phil, I have a question from Samantha Carter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there a way for us to access this data in the warehouse?
Yes, there is. So I'll send some follow-up information to you specifically, Samantha, but just at a real high level. So within the warehouse, we have our own schema, which is ASU _student_analytics. And so in there, the core tables that I mentioned earlier in terms of the data mart, that's where they fall. Most of them. Some of them we put them in other places because it just makes logical sense. For example, the LMS tables in the ASU learning schema. But also in there's a table that has the daily predictions in there. We have some additional, more nuanced tables in AUDB, but we're still kind of cleaning those up before we move them into the warehouse. So the long answer to a short question is yes, we do, and happy to reach out to you, Samantha, to give you more details about that. And then the last dashboard, if some of you remember the retention dashboard, which was on Corda, which got retired, really the campaign builder will replace a lot of that functionality. But while that's being built, Sujata on our team built a stopgap retention dashboard that does a lot of the same core functionality, not exactly, but a lot of what's needed to pull lists of specific students. If you need access to that, we have a group, Actionable Analytics, on the analytics site. Just put in a request and I'll go ahead and prove that, and you can get access to that. And that is it. Oh, I just want to plug in some other related presentations in case you're interested in finding more. So if you're interested in the data mart, Josh is going to give an overview of that. So yeah, he's been terrific and really helped spearhead our thinking and how we're approaching the data mart. So he'll give an overview of kind of where we are and where we're going. And then Hamid will give a much more nuanced look into how we're using machine learning to create those students persistence predictions. And then Jared's going to focus more on what's our process for identifying predictors in those models and what are some of the more interesting findings. And that's it for me. Thanks. I know I went through that pretty quickly, but I wanted to make sure I got through on time and leave some time in case there's some questions.